When I was a little girl, I was drawn to every musical instrument I could get my hands on. That was usually a harmonica, a ukulele, and my parents bought me a little electric organ that had 1 octave, and I worked on Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the opening bars, like Schroeder in Peanuts. I desperately wanted a piano. My dear mother, who had no interest in playing, was forced to as a child and thought I would just lose interest after a while. And finances were an issue. Musical instruction was costly. In high school, I got involved in theater productions, and there I found my niche. We moved back to Cedar Falls, Iowa from Kansas, and all the kids in my class had been together since kindergarten, so breaking in was difficult. So theater was how I integrated into the class. I built sets, I acted many parts, I was the wardrobe mistress. Excited, I told my mother I wanted to be an actress. She told me to take typing and shorthand. That ages me. Not being mean or seeking to squash my dream, she wanted to protect me from the harsh reality of choosing a career path that could lead to heartbreak, disappointment, and probably poverty. I hold a belief that children, by the time they are 7, are in touch with what they love and what they're good at. And where those two intersect, there is a job description. My husband Horace had 2 sons who loved, as little kids, to take things apart and put them back together. They became Boeing engineers and were very well compensated straight out of college. A young nephew who was the most argumentative child I have ever met became a lawyer who takes on large company polluters to court and wins with great glee, using those innate abilities. Artistic careers can definitely lead to living in an attic and waiting tables to make ends meet, but people find all kinds of paths to using their talents. Naomi Judd's mother told her, "Thank goodness you can sing. I don't know what else you would do." I will bet nobody ever told Leonardo da Vinci to shoe horses because it's too hard to make a living as a painter. In those days, youngsters were apprenticed to artisans. But for every successful, exceptionally gifted artist, there are those who just persist and eke out a living anyway. Artists have been making a living for millennia. So because I was good at languages, I got a degree in French. And halfway through a master's program, I realized I didn't want to teach. And there are niches out there for people with liberal arts education, but I was really lost for quite a while. The universe moves in mysterious ways, and even though most of our day-to-day decisions, day in, day out decisions, spring from free will, I believe there are certain events in our life that are fated. One day, a friend gave me an old guitar. A neighbor taught me a few chords. I listened to Joan Baez records and tried to copy what I heard. That cheap guitar was so hard to play. One needed the hands of a lumberjack to hold down the strings, but I just couldn't put it down. I found a job in a department store selling clothes with my little degree in French and went home on my lunch hour to play my guitar. And as Joni Mitchell wrote, to sing my sorrows to the sound hole and my knees. Typing was actually a good idea, and I sometimes had part-time jobs doing clerical work while singing in restaurant lounges at night. And for 10 years, there were folk festivals, country fairs, weddings, and all kinds of gigs performing that paid the bills. I never made the income of an engineer or lawyer, but I was frugal, and I did what I loved to do. Eventually, I parlayed a different innate skill into another career, but as Leonard Cohen wrote, that is a story for another rainy day. I never did learn shorthand.
One night, when my son Kai was in the first grade, we were driving down Broadway in Northeast Portland, and he said, "That building looks like it has a sword sticking out of it." And I said, "Sweetness, you know that's a cross, right?" But no, he did not. And I was really, really grateful that that conversation was not happening in front of his grandparents, or worse yet, my grandparents. So I reminded him of some of the stories that he knew about Jesus and explained about how Jesus died and what Christians believed about his death, which led him to ask the question, well, what is sin? And again, I was feeling like maybe I was not doing the best job of covering some of the basics, you know? I was raised Baptist. Well, I explained what I thought sin was, which is a story for another day. But then I also said that for some people, sin was a list of behaviors that are forbidden, behaviors that they believe are bad, and how some of the things on that list we might all agree on, like no lying, no stealing, no killing. But other things, well, other things didn't necessarily make sense to everybody, not to me. Well, like what? He wanted to know. Well, for example, I said, some people would say their list of sins meant that your friend Xander's moms shouldn't be married to each other. They would say that two women or two men shouldn't be allowed to get married. What? He said, that's crazy. Xander's moms are great, and they love each other, and they love Xander, and why should someone else get to choose for them? And then I started thinking maybe I wasn't doing so bad after all. Yeah. In the interest of transparency, I want to assure you that I always ask my family before I share things about them with you all. Our topic this month is roots and wings. And I got to thinking about how we try so hard to give our children, or our community's children, if you're not yourself a parent, we try to anticipate what the next generation will need in life. And yet, there is no way that we can anticipate some of the directions that life will take them. It's not just youth, right? Because we may all need to be replanted at some point later in life, too. We might need to grow new roots and new wings. And it's hard to anticipate what we're going to need at that time. Although, Diane, my mom did make me take typing, and I was mad about it at the time, but she was so right. Definitely. I was thankful as I was typing yesterday. I believe that language matters, that representation matters. When I was in college, I had a boilerplate disclaimer that I attached to every essay that I turned in, where I explained that I had intentionally used they, them instead of the so-called generic he, or the awkwardly wordy he or she or his or her. Sometimes professors actually marked me down for that. They said it was not grammatically correct to which I responded that the generic he was not spiritually or morally correct. There have been many times in my life when I was happily reading a book only to have the author say something gendered that immediately let me know that I was not the intended audience for that book. Most books weren't even subtle about it. I mean, starting with the Bible, right? The Apostle Paul seems to always be congratulating the reader on having such well-behaved women. When my children were little, I was always changing the gender in picture books on the fly. I mean, really, it's a story about a rabbit, a turtle, a duck, and a beaver going on a bike ride or a boat ride. Why do they all need to be male? There's no reason. I actually would write it in the books so that when they learned to read, they could see what it had originally said, what I had said it should say, and have a conversation with me about it. And in our house, we tried not to be heterosexist. Dolls could follow their hearts and marry whomever they wanted, regardless of gender. And when our kids were imagining their own futures, we would say, well, when you grow up, if you fall in love with someone, he or she might this or that. We wanted it to make it clear from the very beginning that love is love. Recently, my youngest child told me that they aren't a boy or a girl. And while it wasn't a new concept for me, I know a lot of non-binary people. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I go to a UU seminary. It certainly wasn't something that I had imagined when I was busy ensuring equal representation of boys and girls in those board books. And it's an adjustment. I'm not getting their pronouns right as consistently as I would like. And there are so many gendered words to unlearn. Remembering to say child or kid instead of daughter or girl, to say sibling instead of sister. And suddenly I'm writing goofy foot, tripping over myself, trying to get it right. Or I'm like that girl in the fairy tale with the snakes and toads dropping from her lips. If I'm honest with myself, it's not just that I don't want to hurt them, and of course I don't want to hurt them, I want to be sensitive. But it's also this perfectionist impulse, right? I like being the one leading, the one teaching. It kind of feels awkward being the one following. But my sweet child has graciously assured me that it is normal to have a learning curve. It's okay, Mom, they said. From what I read, it takes a good 6 months to transition, and you are right on track. Our Gray hymnal, Singing the Living Tradition, was published in 1993, when I was in college. And there was a big push at that time to, can you guess, to get rid of the generic he in all of those hymns. It was a big controversial step toward justice to have all of those hymns say men and women instead of just men, or humanity instead of humankind. Instead of mankind. See, I've trained myself so well, I can't even say anything. And some people were uncomfortable. I bet a lot of folks felt like they kept putting their foot in their mouth, or like they had snakes and toads dropping from their mouth whenever they spoke. And probably some of them, including some women, longed for the comfort and the familiarity of the way they had always sung those hymns. But then, there were also so many women who felt included, fully seen and included for the first time. Today, every week, all across the country, UU music directors and UU ministers are scribbling non-gendered alternative lyrics in the margins, trying to create a decent rhyme and get the meter right to boot. No more men and women. And noticing along the way, ableist lyrics that need to be updated, and colonial appropriation that needs to be acknowledged. I'm in several Facebook groups for UU worship planning, and there's always someone asking for suggestions on alternative lyrics for this hymn or that hymn. Our opening words this morning by Emma Goldman, the activist and anarchist Emma Goldman, were from the Gray Hymnal, number 559. The original reads, "Someday, men and women will rise. They will reach the mountain peak. They will meet big and strong and free, ready to receive, to partake, and to bask in the golden rays of love." I changed it to say, "Someday the people will rise," in order to use it in this service. But I felt conflicted about it. The passage is from the closing paragraph of Goldman's essay, Marriage and Love, which is a treatise on the oppression of women, specifically on how that oppression compromises genuine love within marriage. In other words, degendering that passage amounts to a sort of colonization or appropriation of Goldman's work. You could argue that that had already happened just by virtue of taking it out of context to put it in the hymnal in the first place. But degendering it makes it almost unrecognizable from the original intention of what she was writing. And yet, justice and inclusivity today means ensuring that we don't reinforce the gender binary. Holding space for these changes, trying to hold space so that we are in right relationship with everyone in the room, including our friends in the virtual room, and holding space for the people that we hope would feel welcome if they were to come join us in this room. This is the work, even when it's uncomfortable. Holding space for change or relationship is the work. And how we manage it here in these spaces, in our homes, in this congregation, well, this is where we practice and how we do it in the greater world. The backdrop to these changes within UU congregations was, and is right now, a tremendous amount of change happening culturally in the wider community, in the whole country. Activist and philosopher Adrienne Marie Brown recently said, "What a time to be alive. Right now we're in a fast river together, and every day there are changes that seemed unimaginable until they occurred." This past Friday, President Biden said, "Once every few generations, there's a fundamental shift in the world politics and the national politics, and that we are in such a shift right now." All of this change, this unexpected future that has rushed up to the now, can feel overwhelming and disorienting. That feeling of uncertainty can cause human beings to get defensive, even angry. And there can be a temptation to indulge in nostalgia. Make UU great again. This can be especially true if you've always been the one leading the charge for justice, if you felt that you were the one leading the charge for justice, and now you feel that maybe you're struggling a bit to keep up. I know I'm struggling a little bit to keep up. And you know, maybe you had this vision of the future that you were working toward, and everyone just suddenly forged a new path in a direction you hadn't even imagined, and someone else is leading, and there might even be a cliff over there. You just don't know. Which really brings us back to the heart of the matter. Who gets to be a leader? Whose voices are heard? Who feels so welcomed here that they feel that they belong and they can speak up and be a part of this experiment in covenant and justice that we are conducting in real time. What these times of uncertainty call for is faith. Faith that if we are all holding space for change together, if we are all holding space for each other in right relationship together, that we can build a new way, that we can reach that beloved community together. May it be so.